Okay, but for today's class, since we find ourselves in the month of Elul, which is the month of, as we just mentioned, of awakening, of self-rectification, of self-introspection, I want to speak about a topic that serves as the theme of the month, and that is the better self, or living our best self, as they say. And of course, there are many ways to live our best self, but I want to go to the very fundamentals and speak of the three aspects of the best self that should be worked on during this month, as is suggested, of course, by our sources, by Judaism altogether. But first, let's go to the month of Elul, which is an interesting month, not just because of its theme, as we just spoke about, but because also of its name. The month of Elul was named Elul by our sages because Elul in Aramaic means to search. And again, it represents searching within ourselves to live so that we can ensure that we each and every day show up with our best self from within. But in addition to that, sages have also taught that the word Elul is an acronym for many different verses. The most popular of all is Ani ledodi vedodi li. Aleph Lamed Vav. Lamed stands for Ani ledodi vedodi li, which means I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. Now, many make a mistake and they think that this is speaking only about God. I am devoted to God and God is devoted to me. But it's really speaking about not just God, about us. During this month, we have to ask for forgiveness from others. We have to repair broken relationships. We have to ensure that we are indeed to our beloved, to everyone who should be our beloved. And there's a very strong hint to what makes a relationship successful in this verse. Because very often we say, well, he hasn't spoken to me, so I'm not going to speak to him. Or he started up with me, I'm not going to. It doesn't start with him or her. It starts with you, just as it is in the verse. Ani ledodi. First you. You have to make that step. And then vedodili. Same with God, by the way. God waits for you to make the steps that you need to make. Then he comes and helps you out. But if you stand there passively, God is not going to come and help you. Same with relationships altogether. If you wait for others to act, your relationships will never be repaired. You have to make your effort. You have to give your best. And then that will be reciprocated. King Solomon has a powerful verse that says, Kamayim apanim el apanim, ken lev ha'adam el ha'adam. Book of Proverbs that says that just as my face reflects in waters, you look at a body of water, your face will be reflected back, right? So too, my heart will be reflected back by others. What this means is that if I love others, my heart, then they'll love me back. And conversely, if I dislike others, they'll dislike me back. The way the world reacts to you is the way you have initiated contact with it. And if your contact was initiated with love, it will respond with love. That's the truth of the human condition. King Solomon said that 3,000 years ago. But this is why, Ani ledodi. Let me first respond to the people around me, ledodi, with love, my beloved. And then dodi li, and then almost automatically, the love will reflect back to me. It's fascinating, but I dare you to launch a mental exercise in your minds right now and think of someone who you know is loved by all. And I can promise you that that person that is loved by all is because that person loves everyone. So he's loved, I wish. So everyone loves him back or her back. But that's the way the human nature works. And this is again embedded in the name of this month. Ani ledodi vedodi li. In order to first and foremost find the version of our best self within ourselves, search it, and then find it. Elul, right? To search it and then find it. That we have to ensure that we act with love, with kindness, because that is what our best self wants to do. And then the world will respond, and God himself also will respond equally. So that's number one. Yes. Yeah, that's good. Good question. So really, it comes from, it's a verse that comes from the Song of Songs. Shir HaShirim, also authored by King Solomon. But Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is really the most romantic book in the entire Tanakh. And it's a love story. So in the context that it is found, that verse is found, Anile Dodi V'Dodi, then the context is the context of love. And therefore, the verse must be speaking about love, because that's the context of the story. So that's why it's translated as my beloved. Even though Dodi, yeah, so Dodi could mean multiple things in biblical Hebrew. It could mean uncle, but it also could mean my beloved. Actually, it's interesting because so the reason why we think it's also God in many ways is because Dodi spells out the letters Yud Dalet Vav Dalet, which is one of the names of God. In fact, we spell Yud Dalet Vav Dalet when we don't want to spell the Hey completely to honor God's name. We don't spell his name completely out of respect. And therefore, when many people spell out the real name of God, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, they omit the bottom leg of the Heys, of the two Heys, leaving the letter to be spelled like a Dalet, Yud, Dalet, Vav, Dalet. But this is also why the Dodi year in this context is, many say, refers to God, but refers to the God in others too. And that's why it's not just the God up there that we have to work on, but it's the God in others too. Okay, good question. Yes. Right. Mm. So it's not a must, but again, it's out of utter respect towards God, so that we don't spell out his name, and then who knows where his name might end up if we spell it out completely. If I spell out G-O-D, or if I spell out Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, today everything's done almost electronically, right? So I send out an email, but who knows if that email, first of all, is not going to be deleted, or it might be printed and then thrown away. Right. Right. Look, it's not a big deal if you wrote it with an O, but it's really out of respect, so that again, it doesn't end up in the garbage. So just out of mere respect. Okay, so that's the theme. That's the general direction of this month, right? Elul, I am to my beloved is to me. Speaking of, now that we spoke about what we have to do towards others and towards God, let's speak about God in this month. God in this month is compared, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi says, to a king in the field. Let's read the reference, because I think every word here speaks to the idea perfectly. Does anyone want to read? During this month of Elul. Please go for it, sir.
Later, however, after he enters his royal palace,
Right.
his presence. So too, by Analogy,
Right. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, one of the great Kabbalists of 300 years ago, says that in this month, God is in the field. And the analogy, I think, is pretty clear, that it's like the king who comes out of his palace. Anyone can come and see him. We don't need an appointment to see a king who's in the field. So too, God is in the field. He's very accessible during this month. That's why also this month is called Chodesh HaRachamim VaSelichot, the month of compassion, mercy, Rachamim, because God really is compassionate towards each and every one of us. In fact, someone just sent me a video last week with an Israeli politician who went by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to receive his blessing many years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And, you know, the Rebbe would give out dollars every Sunday. And by giving $1, he would also bless people. That dollar, of course, was meant to be for charity. And this Israeli politician says, Rebbe, we need your blessing. These are very difficult times for Israel or for the Jewish peoples. Manim Kashim. And the Rebbe says, difficult times? We're in the month of Elul. The king is in the field. It's not difficult. All we need to do is access the king who's waiting for us to come to him. And in many ways, this is really what these words mean. God is in the field. He wants us to come and greet him. So as long, so when we take that step forward that we were speaking about before, when we do what we need to do, when we rectify that which needs to be rectified, that's when God says, okay, that's so good. You've come to meet me. You've made some efforts towards me. Now make some efforts towards you without any challenges, without any secretaries along the way that need to make an appointment. I'm there for you. And that's really what this month stands for. And now because this month is a month in which the potential of a meeting with God, of a real face-to-face meeting of compassion with God exists, therefore, we have to work on ourselves so that the person that meets God is the best. And then God will have no choice but to shower that person with all of his blessings because he's meeting the best of the best version in ourselves. How do you achieve that best version of yourself? That's the big question. I think, again, there are 3 steps here. Let's talk about step 1. Step 1 is hinted in a story that we read on Rosh Hashanah. In fact, Rosh Hashanah, as you all know, is a 2-day holiday, even in Israel. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we read about the story of Samuel. And on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read about the creation of Adam and Eve and how they sinned with the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, if you recall. It's interesting because the first story makes sense. Sorry, the second story makes sense. We read about the creation of Adam and Eve, and they sinned. Why? Because on Rosh Hashanah, that's when it happened. He sinned on Rosh Hashanah. The creation of Adam and Eve were on the 25th of Elul. 6 days later, he sinned. Sorry, the creation of the world was on the 25th of Elul. 6 days later, Adam and Eve were created, and they sinned on the day they were created. And that's the day of Rosh Hashanah. So it makes sense to read that story on the second day. But why read about Samuel on the first day? What's the connection? That the story that we're about to read about here happened on Rosh Hashanah? It's unclear. There seems to be no seeming connection between this story and Rosh Hashanah. So why read about it on Rosh Hashanah? But let's first, to answer this question, let's first go to the story itself. It's a fascinating story about how Samuel became the prophet. I'll summarize it for you in just a few words. Instead of, you have the reference here if you want to read into it. But Samuel was given over to God by his mother, Hannah. It's a very heart-wrenching story. But Hannah was childless for many, many years. And she promised God that if you give me a child, I will devote him to you. And she was blessed with a child. And at the age of, when Samuel turned 3, that child was named Samuel. When Samuel turned 3, she went and brought him to the tabernacle of the day, to the high priest, Eli Cohen. And she says to him, look, I have to keep my promise. God blessed me with a child, and I have to devote him to God. He joins God's domain at the age of 3. And there he lives, there he's raised, there he sleeps, there he eats. And when he's about 9 years old, he goes to sleep one night and he hears voices calling his name. Shmuel, Shmuel. So he jumps out of bed and he goes to the high priest. And he says, did you call me? The high priest says, no, what are you talking about? Go back to sleep. So he goes back to sleep, and this happens a second time. It happens a third time. And eventually, when he goes back that third time to Eli Cohen, to the high priest says to him, look, I didn't call you. No one here called you. But since this happened 3 times, it must be God calling you. And if it happens again, just say, Hineni, here I am. That happens again. Samuel says, Hineni. And at that moment, he became the prophet of Israel. Maybe the most dominant prophet in the history of the Jewish people. He's the one who fired King Saul. He's the one who appointed King David. He's the one who guided the Jewish people back to Israel. Eventually, that led to the destruction of the first temple. He was one of the most dominant prophets. He became a prophet at the age of 9. Why? Because he said, Hineni, to the voice of God calling him. And this is why we read the story on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Because in many ways, God is telling us on this first day of Rosh Hashanah that all of us are prophets. all of us are as holy as prophets, as divine as prophets, with a potential as big as prophets. But what do we do very often when that prophet within wants to come out and change the world and do big things? We put it back to sleep. We say, go back to sleep. But some voice is calling you. You're living in a dream. You're elucidating, as they say. So we go back to sleep, and we go back to sleep a second time and a third time. But we forget that it's God calling us. And it's in many ways the story of so many people. You know, it's interesting because when you ask children, what do you want to be? What are the dreams? They'll tell you, at first they'll tell you, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a fireman. And then as they grow up, they have bigger and bigger dreams. And then more or less at the age of 14, and I think the statistics about this, their dreams start to be compromised. I thought I could change the world. I thought I could be the biggest billionaire. You know, like my son told me I want to be Elon Musk. I said, please don't. But no, not in that sense. I want to be as wealthy as Elon Musk. So, all right, fine. That's a good dream to have. But whether you want to be the biggest billionaire, biggest scientist, biggest doctor, doesn't matter. They have big dreams. But then we start compromising our dreams. And then, you know, slowly but surely, life gets the better of us, and we have to pay bills, and we have challenges and this. And then we were taught to smaller lives. And here, the first story that we say on Rosh Hashanah reminds us that we shouldn't let go of our dreams. Yeah, maybe we had crazy dreams, but that dream that had a big picture in it, a big aspiration to it, don't let go of. Go and do the best you can. Live to your fullest potential. This is, again, the story of Samuel that we read on Rosh Hashanah to remind us to go back to that very best self of ours, which wants to achieve so much. You know, who's a baseball fan here? Any baseball fans? Yeah? So apparently you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the all-time hitters was Pete Rose, right? Now, when he was about to achieve the record, they asked him, how many at-bats do you think will take you to achieve that record? And I think he was like 2 at-bats away, or maybe even just 1 away. And he said, just 1. They said to him, but it's impossible, right? Every baseball, the best baseball player has what, an average of 30%, of 35% maximum. What's the record today? 300. Yeah. All right. So it's impossible. You're going to miss at least 2 or 3 times until you reach the record. Why just 1? He says, I have no right to enter the batter's box if I think that I'm going to miss. I have no right to enter the batter's box if I think I'm going to miss. I'm going to get it. The first shot, I'm going to hit that record in just 1 shot. And in many ways, it's the mentality of champions. And it's the mentality we should all have. Yes, we may think we're going to miss goals, or therefore we're going to delete them altogether. But being a champion or living like a prophet is about knowing that we have to do our very best. And when we do our very best, we're going to hit that mark no matter what. Yes, sometimes we'll miss, but it shouldn't be the mindset that we have. Because when we have a Pete Rose mindset, and or maybe even better, then we are living really the best version of ourselves. Then we are living like prophets. So that's story number 1 from the book of Samuel. Story number 2, again, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read about the creation of Adam and Eve, and they sinned, which makes sense because that's when it happened. But what makes most sense about the story is not necessarily about the story about the creation and how they sinned, but it's really about the call of God to Adam after he sinned. Do you remember that story? They ate from the forbidden tree because they were seduced by the snake. That's the opening story of the Bible, of the Torah. And then they realized that they sinned. So what do? They immediately go and hide. They're embarrassed. Like happens to anyone who sins. The first reaction is, oh, you're embarrassed. I shouldn't have done it. So they hide. And then God appears to them. And I'm going to read here from Genesis 3, verse 9. And God was, so then the man and his wife heard the sound of God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of day, while they were hiding. And they hid from God among the trees of the garden. But God called Adam, where are you? In Hebrew, ayeka. Now, of course, many commentaries ask the question, did God not know where Adam was? Doesn't God know everything? What does this mean? Now, this question, I want to take you to a story. This question was posed to Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who we spoke about, who said that the king is in the field. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi lived under the Soviet Union, the communist Russia, and he was imprisoned for spreading Judaism in Russia, and even faced the death sentence at one point. When he was thrown into his cell, there was a KGB officer who was supposed to supervise him, but the KGB officer realized that he was supervising a rabbi, and since he was a very devoutly religious man who knew the Bible, he used this opportunity of him supervising a rabbi to ask him questions about the Bible. During one of his supervision shifts, this KGB officer goes to Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi and says, I have a question for you. Don't you believe that God knows everything? Why does he ask Adam, where are you? He knew where he was. Why does he have to ask him, where are you? And Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was a very holy man, responds as follows to this KGB officer. Let's read the last reference here. Where are you? Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Please go for it. Go, Mendy.
What have you accomplished? You have been allotted a certain number of days, hours, and minutes in which to fulfill your mission in life. You have lived so many years and so many days. Where are you? What will you achieve?
Right. And according to the story, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi even named the exact age. So many years, you're 53 years old, and so many days, and 267 days, or whatever it was. Where are you, KGB officer? What have you achieved in life? Really? This is who you are, a KGB officer who's the extension of this evil empire that you work for? How dare you? But that is really the reason why God said to Adam, where are you? And in many ways, this is why we read about this story on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, because if Rosh Hashanah is condensed to one message, it's this message. It's God calling upon us, where are you? Where are you in life? Not geographically or physically. Where are you in life? Where are you spiritually, mentally, emotionally? Where are you? Where's your direction? What are you achieving? And not only what are you achieving, but where is your mindset? Where are you up here? That's the big question of Rosh Hashanah. So to go back to step 1 year of achieving the best version of ourselves, these 2 Torah readings of Rosh Hashanah already hold a part of the answer. One aspect of it, as we said, is to dig in until we find that inner prophet that wants to change the world. And number 2, to dig in, to find that inner prophet that wants to change the world, and through that, answering the question of where are you? What is my direction in life altogether? Step 2, as you can see right here, actually, the shofar that we just blew is curved. Now, there is an argument in the Talmud about the shape of the shofar. It's an interesting argument because you say to yourself, gosh, what? We really have to fight about everything? Who cares about the shape? As long as it comes from a kosher animal, so what? But no, the Talmud deducts that the shofar has to be curved. It can't come from a goat, for example, that have straight horns, right? It's got to come from a ram or from a deer or from any other type of kosher animal and has curved horns. Now, why? Who cares whether it sounds more or less the same, will still wake you up. Who cares whether the shofar is straight or curved? And let's read just quickly about this argument, which is an interesting Talmudic argument. What type of shofar should be used on Rosh Hashanah? Does anyone want to read? Rabbi Meir says. Please go. Let's go, Mendy.
Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Allouche said that we must use a ramsman, which is always curved. What is the rationale behind the decision?
Right, and here comes the answer. Okay. Yeah, continue, please. Yeah.
while Buddha bases himself on the principle that the more a human being can bend his perception, the better it is. The law follows the view of Rabbi Allouche, and Rosh Hashanah, we must use a curved choice.
Right, and it goes back to the idea of ani ledodi vedodi li, that in order to truly connect, not just to the God out there, but to God in others, then we too have to be like a kosher shofar, which is a curved shofar. We too have to bend our perspective. By bending our perspective, by recognizing that sometimes I don't hold the ultimate truth, but maybe the other does, but I'm so stubborn that I can't see it. I'm so blinded by my own ego that I can't see it. By doing so, then we are divorcing the ani from the dodi. But if I can bend my perspective and try to put myself in other person's shoes and see life from there, that's when the ani and the dodi can truly unite with one another. And that's why, again, we use a bent shofar. And there's a great book out there, an old book called Why Marriages Succeed and Fail by Dr. Gottman, who's the proud Jew. But he says that if we had to condense the success of marriage and in general of relationships altogether into two ideas, it's the following two ideas. Number one, that the two sides of the relationship have common values, tremendously important. Number two is that they recognize that they don't always hold, that each side recognizes that he or she don't always hold the ultimate truth, that they don't always know the ultimate truth, that maybe the ultimate truth is actually communicated by the other, a truth that I may not initially see, but only if I have the courage to go to the other person's side and see it from his or her perspective, then I can achieve success in relationships and in marriage. That's again, his perspective, which is scientifically proven in this book. But in many ways, this is, again, the secret of going to finding, not just searching, but finding our best self. In order for our best self to emerge, we have to be able to first and foremost recognize that I am not always on the side of truth, as painful as it is to recognize that from time to time. Going to the other person, putting ourselves in their shoes, is really the only way to do it from time to time. You know, there's this cute cartoon. You can see it right here at the bottom. When you look at that number on the floor, is it a 6 or a 9? Well, it depends, right? Depends where you stand, whether it's a 6 or a 9. And I want to tell you really a very powerful story. Story about a woman that I met by the name of Yocheved Bruckman. But she's out of New York, so I don't know if anyone knows her, but Yocheved Bruckman tells the story of when she was young, she would go, I'm sure as many of us did, to a specific overnight camp for many weeks, right? And she remembers that one day during visiting day, she was very excited because her grandfather, who didn't usually come, was coming to visit her at this overnight camp. She was a young girl and she remembers this day vividly. And when her grandfather comes, she says, oh, Grandpa, I want to give you a tour of my camp and you'll see, what fun I'm having here, etc. So she gives her grandfather a tour. And because it's visiting day, they bump into all sorts of people and they know a lot of the people. Many of them come from the same community. So her grandfather stops and hugs people and says hello warmly to people and so on. And she continues on with the tour. And at one point, they pass by this elderly man, and she notices that her grandfather just nods at this man and continues on, which was atypical of him because he was hugging people and speaking to them warmly. So she says to her grandfather, who's this man that you just nodded your head to? And why didn't you give him a warm welcome like you did to all sorts of others? And her grandfather says, you don't want to know. Doesn't matter. Just move on. But she insists and insists. And eventually her grandfather says, look, I'll tell you the story. I knew this man from before the war. In fact, he was my best friend before the war. Now, before the war, as you may know, people were scrambling to get out of Germany or Poland, of these dangerous places. And I was successful in obtaining visas for my entire family so that we can flee. Now, no one knew about my visas. I gathered them. I put them in a drawer in my home. No one knew about my visas. No one knew about my drawer. And then when it was time, except for one person, this guy, my best friend, when it was time for us to flee, I went to my drawer that was locked this whole time. I opened it up and I see that the visas are not there. And I said to myself, gosh, what could have happened? And I'm scrambling to find them. I can't find them. So he decides to go to his best friend to ask him. Maybe he knows. He's the only one who knows about these visas and the hiding place of these. So he goes to his best friend, knocks on the door. He realizes that his home is empty. He goes to his best friend's neighbor and he says, where's my best friend? The neighbor says they fled yesterday. And he realizes that it was his best friend who stole the visas. Now, Yochevet's grandfather, thank God, survived the Holocaust. But all of his family was decimated, gassed to death. And now he tells Yochevet, you asked me why I just nodded? Just nodded because of that. So Yochevet said, so why did you nod altogether? I would have punched him in the face. Why did you punch him in the face? And her grandfather tells her, you can't judge people. Everyone is under tremendous pressure before the war. So he did that to me. He's not my best friend anymore. But let bygones be bygones. Now I'm saying to myself, if a person like that, who saw his whole family gassed to death because of this best friend, can forgive his best friend, how dare we not? Can put himself in the shoes of his best friend, even though this best friend did something atrocious. How can we not put ourselves in another person's shoes? How dare we judge people so quickly? You know, the ethics of our fathers teaches us that al tadun et adam ad shetagia limkomo, that you cannot judge a person until you reach his or her place. What does this mean? What this really means is that you'll never reach his or her place, so don't judge. Did you live with him? Did you sleep with him? Did you eat with him? Did you experience what he experienced every moment of the? No. So you'll never reach his place. So if you've never reached his place, don't judge him. Yochevet's father embodies that. But this is exactly what we too should embody during this month. Let our shofar be a little bit curved. Again, as painful as it is sometimes, but that is really the only way to show up with the best version of ourselves. Otherwise, we are eaten up by grudges and resentment. All right, number 3, last but not least step. This I learned from one of my favorite and certainly one of the most eye-opening biblical stories. Because many people say, yes, Rabbi, I agree with what you're saying, and yes, I want to change, and yes, I have to be, thinking big, and I have to be forgiving, and so on, but I'll do it tomorrow. I'll think about how to do it, and we never end up doing it. So what's the secret? The Lubavitcher Rebbe would very often say that anything worth doing, another English expression is anything worth doing is worth doing well, right? He would say anything worth doing is worth doing now. Stop delaying things. So again, in the words of the Mishnah and Ethics of our fathers, don't say that when I'll have time, I'll learn, because you'll never have time. So don't delay things. Now, what story really personifies this is the story of King David. Before King David became king, he was a simple shepherd. Many of you may know he wasn't even considered to be a king, even though people knew, or at least the prophet knew, that the king of Israel will come from the house of Jesse, of Yishai. He was part of the house of Jesse, but he wasn't even considered. He was a poor shepherd. No one looked at his direction. And eventually, slowly but surely, he became more and more known, mainly because of his warrior skills. And one day he came to King Saul and he said to King Saul, I want to marry your daughter, Michal. Now, how can this poor shepherd marry the princess? So King Saul says to him, trying to dismiss him, well, if you can go and kill 100 Philistines, then you'll marry my daughter Michal. Not only did he want to proved to him that he'll never be able to marry her. But he also was hoping that King David would be killed by trying to kill 100 Philistines, because he was starting to become more and more popular, and it was overshadowing his fame, King Saul's fame. So he said, you know, go kill 100 Philistines, and then maybe you'll be able to marry his daughter Michal. King David goes and kills 200 Philistines. So he's overly successful. So he goes back to King Saul and he says, give me your daughter. You promised me. A deal is a deal. I need to marry Michal. King Saul does something that was very, very dishonest, to say the least. What does he do? He tells Michal, hey, King David, wants to marry you. Go and marry someone else so that you're taken, and then he won't be able to marry you. And he marries her off with a guy named Palti ben Laish. Now, put yourself in Palti's shoes. Palti now has a wife called Michal, but he says to himself, one second, I just married her now a few hours ago, but she doesn't belong to me. She belongs to David, right? David, that was King Saul's promise. So am I allowed to touch her? Am I not allowed to touch her? He says to himself, I'm not allowed to touch her. She belongs to another man. But King Saul is the king, and you can't go against his decrees. If he told you to marry, you marry her. So he says, fine, I'll marry. I'll act as if I'm married, but I won't touch her. Now, apparently, Michal was one of the most beautiful women in the world. Yet when he brings her home that night of his marriage with her, he says to her, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to touch you. And what he does to prove his point is that he takes out his sword and he plunges it in the middle of their bed. And he says, look, you are sleeping on one side, I'm sleeping on the other side. If you dare touch me, may the sword kill you. If I dare touch you, may the sword kill me. And he lived like that apparently for many, many years, controlling his inclination, knowing that this woman belongs to another man. Just imagine. And this is why eventually God changes Palti's name. Palti is named Paltiel, which means Palti, El is the name of God, the man of God. Palti belongs to God. Because he was able to control his inclination so strongly for so many years, God said, I want to be associated with a man like this. And he adds his name to Palti's name, Paltiel. But what this story teaches us most, and that's the point I really want to make, is sometimes we have moments of inspiration, just like Palti had on the day of his wedding. I can't touch this woman. That's my moment of clarity, my moment of inspiration. And we are awakened, we are very elevated by these moments, but then they fade away. And we forget about them, and we were taught to our second best version of ourselves, to say the least. And therefore, Palti takes out his sword and says, I need a reminder of this moment of clarity, so that if I forget about it, I'll be able to go back to this moment in my memory. This sword will remind me of this memory, and I'll remain at the high level of the best version of myself. So again, what this story is saying is that we have to take these moments of inspiration, which I'm sure we'll have during Rosh Hashanah, during Yom Kippur. We have moments like that. And make sure that you capitalize on them. And make sure that you take upon yourself a good mitzvah, a good resolution, so that they don't go to waste, so that they don't just fade away. Take your own mental swords and put them down, translate them into concrete actions, so that again, they are materialized and they don't just dissipate. That we learn from Palti, and that I think is the third step of living the best version of ourselves, by taking all these moments of clarity and transforming them into actions so that they don't just fade away. Yes, we had questions, comments, please. Yes. Oh, that's a good question. So that was the name of his father, Laish, Palti, the son of Laish. Laish, I'm not sure. Laish may come from the name Lash, which means to need. Lalouche, like in Hebrew, we say to need bread is Lalouche, Isa. It's interesting because my last name might come from the same derivative, Allouche. Yeah, and it probably does, but that's a whole story. But that's what Laish might mean. Palti really means to flee, to escape. And like they say, plitim. You know, fugitives are called plitim. Same name, palit, palti. And the reason for that, as the sages teach, is because he fled his evil inclination. Based on the story here. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Anyway, so friends, let's just conclude here with this big idea. Who wants to read the very last reference of the third page? We have another volunteer now. Okay, good.
Clarity of vision and clarity of heart. This is who I really should be. These are my real priorities, my true goals in life. It is tempting though to relax and think that this newfound clarity will last. That you have now truly changed.
Yeah, now good luck with the Yiddish. That Morgan. That's right. Right.
Realization fade under the grind of daily life. Halting then love Yish. Intelligence to really change sees those unique moments when you're given clarity, immortalize them, take a snapshot of yourself at that time and frame it and hang it up on the walls of your heart, or better yet, on the walls of your bedroom. Revisit it in your loneliness moments at times when you struggle to define the real value.
Right. Very good. They used to call that a Kodak moment. You remember that? But Kodak went out of business. So just take a Kodak moment or snapshot of your best self and live with it for the rest of the year. And then no doubt, if we can follow this and the previous two steps, we'll all be blessed with a Shana Tova Umetuka, good, sweet, and happy year.